Thomas Rivera had been a postal worker in San Antonio, Texas for 15 years. The same route, Monday through Saturday. 6 a.m. start. He knew every house, every dog, every mailbox that stuck. He was 68 years old, quiet, reliable, the kind of postal worker who remembered when people were expecting packages, who knew which elderly residents needed help carrying heavy deliveries to their door, who waved at children waiting for the school bus. Nobody really knew much about him. He lived alone, never married, no kids, drove a 15-year-old Honda Civic, lived in a small apartment near the base, kept to himself. The other postal workers at the distribution center knew him as Tommy. Friendly but private, always on time, never called in sick, did his job, went home. Until a Tuesday morning in September. Route 47, the Morningside neighborhood. Middle-class homes. Mostly retirees. Some young families. Thomas was delivering a package to Mrs. Henderson at 2847 Maple Street. Large box, heavy, from Amazon. He carried it up her driveway. She opened the door before he could knock. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson. Package for you." "Thank you, Tommy. You're always so punctual." He set the box down. Turned to leave. Heard a crash behind him. Another package had fallen from his mail cart. Burst open on the driveway. Contents scattered. Thomas turned back. Froze. Stared at what had spilled onto the concrete. A small wooden box. Military issue. Dark mahogany. It had broken open in the fall. And inside, lying on Mrs. Henderson's driveway in the morning sun, was a Purple Heart medal. The distinctive purple ribbon with white edges. The gold-bordered heart with George Washington's profile. The ribbon bar. The certificate. All still sealed in the original presentation case. Thomas's hand started shaking. He knelt down slowly, picked up the medal with trembling fingers, looked at the address label on the package. It was addressed to him, Thomas Rivera, his current address, but the postmark was from 1968, 56 years ago. The return address, Department of the Army, Washington, D.C. Mrs. Henderson was watching from her doorway. "Tommy, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." Thomas couldn't speak. He just stared at the medal. The medal he'd earned in Vietnam. The medal he'd refused to accept. The medal he'd spent 56 years trying to forget. The medal that had somehow found him anyway. If this story of buried trauma and a medal that wouldn't stay buried already has you hooked, hit that like button and subscribe. What happens when a postal worker's past literally falls at his feet will prove that some honors can't be refused forever, and some wounds take decades to heal. Now, let's go back to 1968, to the day Thomas Rivera earned a medal he swore he'd never accept. Private First Class Thomas Rivera, 19 years old, had been in Vietnam for 6 months. Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 20th Infantry. Operating in Quang Nam Province, March 1968 was chaos. The Tet Offensive had just ended. The country was on fire. Every day was combat. Every patrol was dangerous. Every mission could be your last. Thomas was a machine gunner, M60. The pig, heavy, loud, essential. The squad's base of fire. When things went bad, everyone looked to the machine gunner. March 12th started like any other day. Patrol through a village. Search for enemy weapons caches. Check in with local elders. Standard hearts and minds operation. But intelligence was wrong. The village wasn't friendly. It was a staging area for NVA regulars, North Vietnamese Army, professional soldiers. The ambush was perfectly executed. The squad walked right into it. Heavy machine gun fire from 3 sides, RPGs, mortars, a carefully prepared kill zone. The squad leader, Sergeant Williams, went down in the first seconds. Shot through both legs. Unable to move. The RTO, the radio operator, was hit next. Dead instantly. The radio destroyed. No way to call for help. Thomas's squad was pinned down. 12 men surrounded, taking casualties. No communication. No support coming. That's when Thomas did something that would earn him the Purple Heart and haunt him for the rest of his life. He grabbed his M60, 60 pounds of weapon and ammunition, stood up in the middle of the kill zone, and started walking forward, toward the enemy positions, firing from the hip, laying down suppressive fire, drawing all enemy attention to himself and away from his wounded squad. He walked 30 yards, through automatic weapons fire, through RPG explosions, through hell. He killed or suppressed enough enemy fighters that his squad could drag the wounded to cover, could pull back to a defensive position, could survive, but Thomas was hit multiple times. Rounds through his left shoulder, his right leg, shrapnel in his side from an RPG that exploded 10 feet away. He went down hard, still firing, emptied his entire belt of ammunition, 200 rounds, then passed out from blood loss. Doc Martinez, the medic, crawled to him under fire, started treating him immediately. "You're insane, Rivera. Completely insane. But you saved everyone." Thomas was evacuated. Spent 3 months recovering, surgery, physical therapy, learning to walk again. His company commander visited him in the hospital, told him he was being recommended for the Silver Star, for extraordinary heroism under fire. "I don't want it," Thomas said. "It's not about what you want. You earned it. You saved 12 men. I don't want any medals. I just want to go home." The Silver Star recommendation was downgraded to a Bronze Star with Valor. Thomas refused that too. The Army couldn't force him to accept it at a ceremony, but they could still award it officially. Eventually it was processed as a Purple Heart, the minimum recognition. For being wounded in combat, they couldn't not give him something, but Thomas refused to attend the ceremony, refused to acknowledge it, told the Army to keep it. He wanted nothing to do with Vietnam, nothing to do with the war, nothing to do with the memories. He came home in 1968, honorably discharged, medical retirement, 20 years old with a permanent limp and nightmares that never stopped. The Army sent the Purple Heart to his parents' address in San Antonio. His father, a World War II veteran, was proud, wanted to display it. Thomas took the unopened package, put it in a box, told his father, "I don't want to see it, ever. Put it somewhere I'll never find it." His father, understanding in a way only another combat veteran could, put the medal in storage. Never mentioned it again. Thomas spent the next 50 years trying to forget Vietnam, trying to be normal, trying to live a life that didn't include the day he stood up in a kill zone and decided dying was preferable to watching his friends die. Thomas knelt on Mrs. Henderson's driveway, holding the Purple Heart, shaking. Mrs. Henderson came down from her doorway. "Tommy, what is that?" It's a Purple Heart from Vietnam. Why is it addressed to you?" Thomas couldn't answer, couldn't explain, couldn't process how this medal he'd refused 56 years ago had found him. Mrs. Henderson was in her 70s, old enough to remember Vietnam, to understand what the medal meant. "Were you in Vietnam?" she asked gently. "Yes, ma'am." "Long time ago. You earned this?" "The Army said I did. I never accepted it, never wanted it. I told them to keep it. But somehow," he looked at the package, "somehow it found me anyway." Mrs. Henderson sat down on her porch steps. "My husband was in Vietnam, Marines, 1967. He came home different, angry, couldn't sleep, drank too much. It took him 20 years to start healing. Did he accept his medals? Eventually. It took time, But he realized the medals weren't about celebrating war. They were about honoring what he survived, what he sacrificed, what he did for his brothers. Thomas stood up slowly, his old leg wound aching. The one from that day in 1968. I don't deserve this. Why not? Because I failed. Sergeant Williams, he lost both legs. Never walked again. Martinez, the medic, he was killed 2 months after I left. Johnson, Rodriguez, Chen, all killed that same year. I survived. They didn't. I don't deserve medals for surviving when they didn't. Mrs. Henderson looked at him with eyes that had seen her own share of grief. Did you do your best to save them? Yes. Did you put yourself in danger to protect them? Yes. Then you deserve the medal. Not because you survived, because you tried, because you cared enough to risk everything. Thomas finished his route in a daze. The Purple Heart in his mailbag. He couldn't stop looking at it. When he got back to the distribution center, he asked his supervisor about the package. How did this get into the system? It's postmarked 1968. His supervisor, Maria, looked at the package. That's impossible. This says 1968, but it was just processed yesterday. See? Modern barcode. Current routing. But the postmark must be some kind of clerical error. Maybe someone at the VA found old records, old medals that were never delivered, decided to send them out now. But Thomas knew better. This wasn't just a clerical error. This was the medal his father had stored away 56 years ago. Somehow it had been found. Somehow it had entered the postal system. Somehow it had ended up on his route, falling open at exactly the moment he couldn't ignore it anymore. That evening, he drove to his father's old house. His father had died 10 years ago. His mother 5 years before that. The house had been sold. New family living there now. He knocked on the door. A young couple answered. "Can I help you?" "I'm sorry to bother you. I used to live here. A long time ago. My father stored something in the attic. I know this sounds strange, but is there any way I could check if it's still there?" The young woman looked at her husband. He shrugged. "Sure, follow me." They went up to the attic. Boxes everywhere. Previous owners' belongings. Things left behind over decades. Thomas found his father's old military footlocker. The lock was rusted, broken. Inside were his father's World War II medals, photos, letters, and an empty space where a small wooden box should have been. "Someone took it," Thomas said. "Someone found this medal and mailed it to me." 2 days later, Thomas received a letter, handwritten, old-fashioned cursive. The return address, VA Hospital, San Antonio. He opened it that evening after work. "Dear Thomas, you don't know me, but I know you. My name is Father Miguel Santos. I'm a chaplain at the VA hospital. 3 weeks ago, I met a man named Robert Williams. He was dying. Lung cancer. Stage 4. He had maybe a week left. Robert told me he'd been trying to find you for 50 years. He was your squad leader. Vietnam. March 12th, 1968. You saved his life that day. He lost both legs in that firefight. Spent 50 years in a wheelchair. But he lived, got married, had 3 children, 8 grandchildren. All because you stood up and drew fire away from him long enough to be evacuated. Before he died, he made me promise something. He told me about your father's house, about the footlocker, about the Purple Heart you refused. He'd kept track of you over the years. Knew where you lived, knew you'd become a postal worker. He asked me to find that medal, to make sure you received it, on your own mail route, so you couldn't refuse it again, so you'd be forced to confront what you did that day. He wanted you to know, 12 men survived because of you. 12 men got to go home, to have families, to live lives. That's not failure, Thomas. That's heroism. Robert Williams died 3 days ago. His last words were, "Tell Rivera he saved us. Tell him we never forgot." With respect, Father Miguel Santos Thomas read the letter 3 times, then sat in his apartment and cried for the first time since 1968. Thomas stood in front of a classroom at the local high school, American history class. They were studying the Vietnam War. The teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, had asked him to speak, to share his experience. He'd refused for years, but something had changed after receiving the medal. "My name is Thomas Rivera. I was in Vietnam in 1968. I was 19 years old. I carried an M60 machine gun, 60 pounds of weapon and ammunition. Every day, the students were quiet, attentive. This wasn't a textbook. This was real. On March 12, 1968, my squad was ambushed. My sergeant was hit, couldn't move. We were surrounded, taking casualties. No help coming. I don't remember making a decision. I just stood up, started walking toward the enemy, firing, drawing their attention away from my wounded friends. I was hit. Multiple times. I almost died. But my squad survived. 12 men made it out because I drew fire away from them. The Army wanted to give me medals. I refused. I didn't want them. I thought I didn't deserve them because some of my friends died later in the war. I felt guilty for surviving. He pulled out the Purple Heart, held it up for the class to see. This medal found me 56 years later. My old squad leader, Sergeant Williams, made sure I received it before he died. He wanted me to know that what I did mattered, that the men who survived because of me, that I shouldn't feel guilty for living. A student raised her hand. "Why did you refuse the medals?" "Because I was young, traumatized, guilty. I didn't understand that the medals weren't about celebrating war. They were about honoring sacrifice, about recognizing that soldiers do hard things to protect each other." "Do you accept the medal now?" Thomas looked at the Purple Heart, the medal he'd run from for 56 years. The medal that had found him anyway. "Yes, I do. Not because I think I'm a hero, but because Sergeant Williams wanted me to have it. Because 12 men lived. Because their families exist because of one day in 1968. That's worth honoring. That's worth remembering." After the class, several students approached him. One, a young man named Carlos, said, "My grandfather was in Vietnam. He never talks about it. Never accepted his medals. Keeps them in a drawer. Says he doesn't deserve them." "What's his name?" "Martinez. Dr. John Martinez. He was a medic." Thomas went very still. "Doc Martinez?" "Charlie Company." "You knew him?" "He saved my life. March 12, 1968. I was shot. He crawled to me under fire. Treated me. Kept me alive until the medevac came." Carlos pulled out his phone. Called his grandfather. "Put Thomas on. Doc? Doc Martinez? It's Thomas Rivera. From Charlie Company?" Silence on the other end. Then a voice Thomas hadn't heard in 56 years. "Rivera, Tommy Rivera. You're alive?" "I'm alive. Because of you. You saved me that day. You saved all of us, kid. That walk you did. That was the bravest thing I ever saw." They talked for an hour. 2 men who hadn't spoken since 1968. Reconnecting across 5 decades. Healing wounds that had never properly closed. The Vietnam Veterans Memorial Wall in Washington, D.C. The wall with 58,000 names. Thomas stood in front of it, looking for names he knew. PFC Johnson. KA June 1968 PFC Rodriguez. KIA August 1968 CPL Chenver KIA November 1968. He traced their names with his fingers. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you too." Doc Martinez was there. They'd stayed in touch after that phone call. Traveled to D.C. together. "You did save us, Tommy. For one day in March, you gave us a chance. That's all anyone can do. Thomas wore his Purple Heart on his chest. First time in 56 years. It felt heavy. But other veterans approached, saw the medal, nodded in respect, shared stories. The silent brotherhood of those who'd served, who understood. A photographer from the local paper was there, covering a veterans event. He asked to take Thomas's photo in front of the wall. The photo ran the next week. Local postal worker finally accepts medal after 56 years. The story went viral, not because it was dramatic, but because it was real. A man who'd spent 56 years running from recognition, who'd finally accepted that what he'd done mattered. The VA hospital in San Antonio asked him to speak at their PTSD support group. Dozens of veterans struggling with guilt, trauma, memories they couldn't escape. Thomas told them his story, about refusing the medal, about running from the past, about the moment it found him anyway, about finally accepting it. You can't outrun what you did in combat, the good or the bad. It's part of you forever. But that doesn't mean you have to carry it alone. And it doesn't mean you don't deserve recognition for the times you did something right. For the times you saved someone, for the times you tried. Thomas Rivera continued working as a postal worker until he was 70, then retired. Not because he had to, but because he wanted to spend more time speaking to veterans, helping them process their trauma, encouraging them to accept their service, their sacrifice, their worth. The Purple Heart stayed in a frame on his wall, next to a photo of Charlie Company from 1968. 12 young men, all alive in that moment. Some who made it home, some who didn't, but all remembered. At his retirement party, the postmaster presented him with an award for 15 years of dedicated service, for knowing your route better than anyone, for caring about the people on that route, and for teaching us that sometimes the most important deliveries aren't the ones we make to others. They're the ones that come to us, the ones we've been avoiding, the ones we need to finally accept. Thomas looked at his co-workers, his friends, the people who'd known him as Tommy the Mailman for 15 years, who were only now learning about PFC Rivera the Machine Gunner from 56 years ago. I spent 56 years delivering mail, making sure packages got to the right people. But I couldn't deliver the one package I needed most. The acknowledgement that what I did in Vietnam mattered, that the men I saved mattered, that I mattered. It took my old sergeant dying of cancer to make sure I finally received it. He mailed me the one thing I'd refused for half a century, and it arrived exactly when I needed it. So, thank you for accepting me, for letting me be just Tommy the Mailman for 15 years, for giving me a normal life after a very abnormal experience, and for understanding when my past finally caught up with me. He held up the Purple Heart. This medal represents one day in 1968, one moment when I did something that mattered. I ran from it for 56 years, but I'm not running anymore. Because Sergeant Williams was right. 12 men lived, and that's worth honoring. That's worth accepting. That's worth carrying forward. The room full of postal workers stood and applauded. Not because he was a war hero, but because he was their friend, their co-worker, the guy who knew everyone's route, who helped new carriers learn the job, who was always on time, who had carried his own burden in silence for 56 years until a package fell open on a driveway and forced him to finally accept what he'd done, what he'd sacrificed, what he'd earned, the medal that wouldn't stay buried, the honor that found him despite everything, the Purple Heart that took 56 years to deliver,